all the way from Texas A&M University. Please give it up for Dave Tarvin.
20 plus years ago, my older brother Adam was walking down the stairs and he was so upset. My mom was in the kitchen and she said, "Honey, what's wrong?" And he said, "I have to give a stupid speech today." And he was so upset. He didn't even understand, why do we give stupid speeches? And my mom was like, "Oh, calm down, you'll do fine." And so a few minutes later, my younger brother Drew, you all know Drew, he came down the stairs with a smile from ear to ear. He was so excited. He was happy as a lark. And my mom's like, "Hold the phone. It's a little too early to be this happy. What's going on?" He says, "I get to give a speech today, and it's going to be recorded." Now, this is kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. One of them's too hot, one of them's too cold, but there's a perfect middle. Howdy. I'm Dave Tarvin, and I teach at Texas A&M University in the communication department, and I am that perfect middle brother. I teach courses like public speaking, rhetoric, leadership, intercultural communication, and one of the reasons I wanted to come to AATH this year is because in the fall I'll be teaching the rhetoric of humor. With communication courses, some students are like Adam, some students are like Drew, and there are a lot of students that are right in the middle. But as a professor, I have to reach all of them. And how do I do that? I do it with humor. Humor because it creates group cohesion. It leverages power distances, and it makes learning a lot more fun. Yesterday, we also learned from Steve, and I apologize, I have to doodle on my notes because I have ADHD or ADD in high definition. And so to stay engaged, I draw my art, but Steve gave us more reasons to use humor, and one of them that spoke to me was that it reframes attitudes. So I'm going to be talking about 3 tips in how I incorporate humor into the classroom, and my first tip is to use associations. Now, if you were here last night, you got to see Paul give a wonderful presentation in which he associated himself with a plethora of characters, including James Carville and Shrek, and I thought that was awesome. That was really good. When I use associations, I tend to draw upon Disney because most of my students have seen all the Disney films, and that way I don't have to spoil anything. So when I teach about Gorgias, who is a sophist, and how he defends both Helen and Palamedes, who are known villains in ancient Greece, I oftentimes turn to my favorite Disney film, which is The Lion King. And I defend a very well-known villain, and that's Scar. I use my defense of Scar to show sophist rhetoric, that is, the use of logic to create pleasure and belief. It wasn't that Gorgias believed that Helen or Palamedes were innocent, but that he had fun fabricating that alternate truth. And that's exactly what I do with the defense of Scar. After all, I am Team Simba, and I do have the Hakuna Matata lifestyle, right? So sometimes it's really easy to incorporate associations, other times it's a little bit more difficult. When it is more difficult, I use what Drew taught me as the 10 by 10 matrix to incorporating humor. I create a list of 10 things I want to teach and 10 things I want to associate. So next week I'm going to be teaching hegemony in ancient Greece, and I want to draw upon associations with Harry Potter because it's one of their favorite films and books. Then I just make logical or sometimes not logical connections between what I want to teach and how I want to associate it. So next week when I talk about transparency, I can use Harry Potter's invisibility cloak to show that he's able to verify claims by being invisible. My second tip for incorporating humor into the classroom is to use applied improv. Woo, right? It creates group cohesion, and I do that by creating the yes-and mentality. If any of you went to Julie's presentation yesterday on improv, we talked about the yes-and mentality as well as how it's tied to public speaking, and I couldn't agree more. My favorite improv activity, however, is called Bunny Bunny. Are any of you familiar with Bunny Bunny? Woo, yeah. Where we start a cadence like ooh, ah, ooh, ah, ooh, ah. And then somebody starts, usually me, where we go bunny, bunny, and we pass it to somebody else, bunny, bunny. And the people on the sides of us are going toki, 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 toki. It's insane. And I take my students to the most public place in the university which is Academic Plaza, and I make them do the Toki Toki. But I tell them, if you can do Toki Toki, Bunny Bunny in public, then you can do public speeches in my private little class. My third tip for using humor in the classroom is to incorporate some personal stories. It leverages power distances, so I'm not that scary professor up here. I'm now actually a person. Now they're willing to challenge my assertions, ask questions, and just be more engaged in my lectures. Yesterday, we heard from Amy and her personal testimony, and I tell you what, if I don't know what resilient was before her speech, I do now. That was inspirational. That was amazing. Also, we learned about Brenda's personal story, and her story is saving lives. How amazing is that? I want to give her a round of applause. That is brilliant. When I talk about public speaking, my students are oftentimes afraid to give their first speech, so I talk about my first time in public speaking years ago, and I was terrified to give my first speech as well. My face turned bright red, and I got water in my eyes, and then I passed gas. Now that wouldn't have been so bad, except I said, "Oh my God, I just farted." And that gives my students two things that they can take hold of from that personal story. First, it's okay to mess up. I mean, I farted in my first speech, and now I'm presenting at the AATH. Right? Second, don't self-defeat. They didn't know I farted had I not said I farted, right? If you're nervous, don't tell us you're nervous. If you miss a citation, don't tell us you missed a citation. Don't self-defeat. We would never know. I mean, back when I was talking about Paul, I was farting, and none of you, well, you probably knew, but right, nobody knew. I began to use associations, to use applied improv, and to use personal stories in order to incorporate humor into my classroom. I began today's speech by talking about my brother Adam, and he still despises speeches. My older brother Adam, he still hates them, but he did give a great public speech at his wedding in September. Although he did say awfully instead of lawfully, and for Richard, or poorer, and so we're looking for Richard. His wife now wants to know who Richard is. Regardless, he still hates speeches. But my younger brother, Drew, he still loves speeches, and he gives them all the time. He came to my university last year to give a TEDx talk, and it has over 350,000 views on YouTube right now. I highly recommend you check that out. He loves speeches. So whether you're the Adams of the speaking world, the Drews of the speaking world, or somebody more perfect like me in the middle, I hope you can see how I use humor in the classroom. Now, before I go, I did want to mention Heidi, and thank you so much for this wonderful event that we're doing right now. But last night you said something that really spoke to me. You said that AATH is your family. And so I'm just hoping that maybe by next year I can be your newest middle brother. Thank you.